there's a lot of people who are separated from their own feelings. It's very easy for them to ignore the feelings of others. The willingness to look at this requires doing shadow work.
Yeah, what's coming up for me, Brennan, is like, this to me is the most extreme example of what happens when you tuck something away and you don't actually look at it. It's like, if I can't haven't actually been forced or faced something, of course it's not going to be strong in my psyche, and of course it's not going to be strong in my consciousness. And I just have this feeling of like, if this was a part of of sex education, hey, here's what happened to you when you were a child. So if you have a little bit of sexual dysfunction, this might be a possible reason for it, is like just such a huge disservice. And the idea that children don't remember things or infants don't remember things is crazy to me, because that's actually a time when they're most perceptive, that you're having synaptic pruning, right, from 0 to 7. It's like that is a time when everything is imprinting into your being at the highest level. And it blows my mind that there's still anybody who would actually say this is okay. And I'm like, if someone does say this is okay, I would love to just feel into their energy and see how they actually looked at it. And this is the same way that people inflict harm and violence amongst others. It's you make them be an object, right? I can harm someone if it's an other, it's a them, it's a we versus them. Oh, it's the thing on his penis. It's not really, it's just a little object. But it's like, if you actually face reality of like, no, it's not a thing. This is a part of his being. And maybe the intimate part, his sexual being. And I'm jumping out the problems with, masculinity and things like that. Maybe we look at what's happening from birth.
Yeah, there is an attitude that I notice among those who are pro-circumcision that essentially the only relevant information is what can be measured in scientific data, and not all scientific data, just a very specific sliver of scientific data. So they will say that we have these studies that say that it reduces these diseases by this %, and all of that information about men's feelings, about psychology, about infant development, that can be discounted because I don't know how to quantify that. I don't have a chart that I could show you, even though there are people who've studied those things, and you can measure things like cortisol levels rising or a change in behavior that many researchers have interpreted as post-traumatic stress disorder, all sorts of studies that we go through in the film. But to them, that's the emotional and somehow separate from them. And I think that if I was to speculate on that, I would suggest that there's a lot of people who are separated from their own feelings, and so it's very easy for them to ignore the feelings of others.
Yeah, you referenced the part in American Circumcision where there's what I would call like a conscious circumcision.
Mm-hmm.
They talk to the doctor, and he's like, seems like a very kind-hearted man who just like, he's doing a job that people want done, but he's doing it to like in the most conscious way, where there's kind of almost a ritual and a ceremony around it. It feels like you're honoring this kind of dishonorable process to the best that you can. And even with that, and doing all the things that he did around it to like make the baby comfortable and all those things, it still made me sick to my stomach. And hearing like the screams and the cries, like my girlfriend was brought to tears. And it's such a, like a dark thing. And just like, even just like recounting it right now, like I can almost bring myself to remember that happening to me, even though like I can't consciously, right? It's just like,
A lot of people have had that reaction to the scene in the film. One of the reasons that scene has a title card at the front where it says the full procedure is 20 minutes, we're only going to show you 2 minutes, is because I found when I was doing test screenings that people would just skip that scene because they don't know when they're going in. Am I going to show them 30 minutes? Am I going to show them 2 seconds? And if I was to edit it down to 2 seconds, people would say, oh, well, it's only 2 seconds, but the full procedure is 20 minutes. So I sort of make a deal with the audience, and I let them know, like, it's this long, but this is how much I'm going to show you. And when I did screenings across the country, there were usually 2 or 3 people who'd step outside during that scene, and they would know I'm that's too much for me. I can't handle that. I'm going to wait 2 minutes and then go back into the theater. And there were a lot of people who had that reaction, who teared up and cried. So I think that the willingness to look at this requires doing a bit of what you might call shadow work. It requires being willing to look at the things that make us uncomfortable in order to actually confront them and potentially change them.
Yeah, I love that you're taking it to shadow work, Brendan. And, you know, I want to take it to the shadow of the entire Western medical enterprise, which, I mean, I'll couch it in a quick snippet and then we'll go into that. But, you know, there's a way, and I'm a big fan of Alan Watts. You talk about Zazen and sitting meditation. Alan Watts is one of my teachers, even though he was dead before I was born, because I've listened to maybe at this point 10,000 hours of his audio lectures. And, you know, he talks about this a lot, where like the Western medical enterprise is to conquer nature and to defeat death. It's like death is a disease that we're going to treat and we're just going to get rid of it, you know? And that's how a lot of the Western profession is. And I recently, you know, went through the death of my uncle, which was a very powerful experience for my family. And I remember being a child, being at funerals and feeling how like illusory and weird, and how everyone was holding it together by faith in the doctor or by faith in someone who knew what was going on. And I'm just going to trust it. And it's like this infallible feeling about the Western medical profession that I think falls into this category of circumcision. Because like even with my own parents, I remember like the first time I realized I had been circumcised and started asking my mother and father about it. They're like, oh yeah, it's just what you do though. That's what you do. Like the doctor assured us. And it's like, they hadn't even begun to become a question for them. I know a woman, a friend, mother of two, and her son, she was born, grew up in the Jewish faith. And I think her extended family had something to do with this, but she wouldn't let the doctor circumcise their son. And a rabbi came to her door for a week. Like that's the extent some people go to. And it's like a joint assault. You nailed it. Sex is the taboo. We don't talk about it. And then we got religion and the medical profession doing a twin assault of like, well, you know, your rabbi and your doctor recommend this procedure no matter what. And it's just like, how many parents had no knowledge, were not informed, had good hearts, and put their child's trauma essentially in the hands of these institutions?
It's extremely common. There's actually an entire community of what are known as regret parents, parents who made the decision to circumcise their children and then found out this information later. And doctors on other medical issues are required to give what's known as informed consent. So if you're going to get like surgery on your shoulder, the doctor will tell you everything a reasonable person would want to know about that. Like, here are the risks, here are the benefits, here is what we think might go wrong, these are potential complications, here's what we hope the outcome of the procedure will be. And then you as an adult can make an informed decision on that. With circumcision, they go to the parents and they say, do you want your child circumcised? And that's it. None of the information that we're talking about here is shared, none of the information in my documentary. And there's often a high pressure sales tactic used on the parents right after giving birth. So oftentimes the mother is asked while they're still on drugs from giving birth, if they had some sort of thing like that that was used during birth. So they're a little bit out of it. And one of the court cases that we profile in the film was someone who sued over their circumcision. And during discovery, found out that the mother had given consent for circumcision while she was under the influence of drugs. And he argued, he said, consent given while you're under the influence of drugs isn't valid. So that signature was thrown out during the court case. So there's a lot of things that hospitals and doctors don't do in terms of giving parents information. Prior to the late 1980s, they didn't even ask for consent. They had a general consent form that you would sign when you got in the hospital, and it said the hospital's allowed to do whatever procedures they think is best. It's not specific to circumcision. It's not specific to any vaccine. And it was actually a Jewish couple who wanted to do a ritual circumcision on the 8th day that changed that. So a Jewish couple went in, had a kid, the hospital circumcised them, and they sued and they said, we wanted to circumcise them on the 8th day in a traditional Jewish ritual. of all things, to make it, that's the reason that you now have to ask for consent in hospitals. And the moment you have to ask for consent, parents have to think about it. They go, I don't know, like, should we do this? Should we not? And now, you know, when I was born, if my parents wanted to learn about this issue, they would talk to the doctor, who would say, well, I charge money for circumcisions. I make money on that, so you should do it. And they would talk to their peers who were from a generation where everyone was circumcised. So what do they know, right? They're just like, well, everyone does this, is what we do. And if they really wanted information, they would have had to go to the library and look up academic journals and hope that those academic journals were written by someone who knew what they were talking about, not just someone who was making money and doing research for other people who are making money. Now if you want information, you're having a kid, what do? First thing you do is you search online. You find all sorts of independent information from people who do not have a financial interest in the procedure, and you can fact check what your doctor says to you. So there's a very different flow of information now. And I think part of the reason that the circumcision rate is dropping is that there's that democratization of information where the four of us simply from our computer can create something that lots of people see. And now the information is not just the authority frame of the doctor and of the medical establishment that is making money on the procedure. It is people being able to talk to each other. Think about it then also, if you were a man and you felt bad about the fact you were circumcised, where would you go? How would you find other people who felt the same way? Maybe you confess to a friend, but if you want to get the word out further, you'd have to start a physical newsletter or buy time on TV or write something in the newspaper. How many people have access to that? Now you go online and there's entire communities of what are known as regret parents or people who are doing foreskin restoration. If you go on the comment section of any article on circumcision, you'll see hundreds of men and women and parents talking about what you guys have mentioned, that they wish it wasn't done to them or they wish they didn't do it to their kids. So now this conversation is happening in part because we have the ability to have it.